Hello and welcome to Cohasset Political Society's Open Forum. I'm Amby Tierney, and welcome to our show. Today, I have an empty mug. Now on this show, we're going to be introducing some new segments, one of which is called John's World, which is a play on Water's World from Fox News. In this segment, John Keenan will be going out into the field to interview Cohasset High School's faculty and students to see what their opinions and knowledge on current politics is. Now with that, John, why don't we send you out into the field?
I am simply asking people questions about the current political climate. How do you feel about how the government will not build the pipeline for the Native Americans at Standing Rock?
I believe that the people of Standing Rock are doing a great job in believing in what they want is right for their land. But again, I think the government does have the final say in everything. But again, it comes down to what truly happens.
How do you feel about how the government will not build the pipeline for the Native Americans at Standing Rock?
Yes.
Okay.
I need to learn more about it, but my initial sympathies are with the Native Americans.
How do I feel that they will now not build it?
Yeah.
I was extremely happy to hear about the decision and the reversal of the pipeline. I'm a little worried that it might get reversed again due to the new administration. I actually know folks that drove out there to protest and are still there. So yes, I think we have to put some serious thought into where we're laying these pipes for our energy, our insatiable energy use, and what lands we want to compromise because of our energy use. So yes, I'm very happy about it.
Americans should be able to build their pipeline. I'd say go for that.
Okay.
I thought they were opposed to the pipeline actually being constructed. Maybe I have my facts wrong.
Who is your president?
President Obama?
Donald Trump.
Donald Trump.
My president is obviously Donald Trump. Make America great again.
Donald Trump.
My president?
Yes.
It is Barack Obama.
Well, right now Barack Obama, soon to be Donald Trump.
Currently,
Yes.
that would be President Obama.
If Trump offered Hillary Clinton an ambassadorship, what country would it be for?
Probably somewhere in the UK.
I suppose if Antarctica were a country, that would be that one.
Probably Antarctica.
Germany.
Germany? Okay.
Like Afghanistan or like one of those countries.
Pakistan or something like that?
Afghanistan.
China. China?
I believe the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Yeah. In what war did the U.S. gain independence?
You serious? The American Revolution?
The Revolutionary War, but it was kind of finalized in the War of 1812.
The Revolutionary War.
The Revolutionary War.
The revolution.
That would be the Revolutionary War, yes?
The Revolutionary.
I'm ready to make America great.
Thanks, John. Now our second segment on the show today is called The Show with Jack Fector. On this segment, Jack Fector will be sharing us the news in politics this week. So with that, Jack, to you.
According to all known laws of aviation, there is no way that a bee should be able to fly. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Jack Fector, and this is The Show. Today's joke of the day, Donald Trump. Personally, I'd just like to start off by discussing that this is not a pro-Trump hat. This is an anti-Trump hat. It says "Make Donald Trump again," so I'm not a Trump supporter. So firstly, I'd like to start off. When Trump was elected, I was like, okay, I mean, he's pretty incompetent, but he'll probably surround himself with people who know what they're doing and will actually help to make the country good. I was dead wrong. When Nikki Haley was appointed as the UN ambassador, I was like, okay, like, maybe it'll be a little bit better, but then Ben Carson was chosen for housing and urban development, and I was like, there was just a bad trend began. It's almost confirmed that Rex Tillerson, the ExxonMobil CEO, might be his Secretary of State. I mean, if you tried to find a more corrupt group of individuals than Trump's cabinet, you couldn't do it. Like, Trump's cabinet is literally the Pandora's box of politics, except it's already open, there's no hope, and we're all doomed. Honestly, at this point, we should just start a nuclear war because it would be better for the environment than what Trump has planned. Like, his picks are not even close to like reasonable. Like his press secretary, or the person, Breitbart, who we picked, literally a white supremacist. Like it's like a white supremacist, ExxonMobil CEO, and like Ben Carson walk into a bar. Like what happened? Like we all die. I'm a pretty conservative guy, like economically, but I do believe that people do have like a fundamental obligation to protect the planet. Trump's not going to do that. Like, we should just rename the United States Flint because of how bad our water is going to be. People say that 2016 was like, oh, it was the worst year, like everyone died, like Prince died. But 2016 had Joe Biden and Obama memes and Harambe. What are we going to have in 2017? Like desolate wasteland? If you took the headlines from the last couple of months and submitted it to a movie company like 2 years ago, they'd send you to a mental asylum. Right now, the United States government is literally just a complete joke. I just only hope that it's not as bad as it seems. I guess we'll see December 19th when the Electoral College picks, but still scary. As always, this has been the show. Rest in peace, Harambe. We wouldn't be in this situation if you hadn't died. Back to you, Amby.
Thanks, Jack. Now, our next segment is where we interview a member of the local community in Cohasset. Today, we're going to be interviewing a 8th grade science teacher from Cohasset Middle High School, Bob Erlandson, about climate change. Bob?
Good to see you, Andy.
Nice to see you. So, Mr. Erlandson, I understand you have a background in meteorology.
Yes, I do. I have a degree in atmospheric sciences from University of Wisconsin-Madison.
Very impressive. Now, what are your opinions on the Trump administration's appointments to the EPA, as well as their positions on climate change stated through the campaign?
It's been kind of obvious that Trump has tapped into a lot of angst out in the community across the country about climate change as a concept. It's unfortunate that he's taken up with what we call the climate change deniers, because you look through the data from the past 150 years, you look at the current state of ice throughout the planet, the Arctic ice cap, which has had unprecedented melting even in the winter months this year so far. The evidence is overwhelming that there has been an increase in the energy level of the planet. Now, there's lots of room for argument about how you address that, whether it be a big government solution or market forces. But the evidence is pretty uncontrovertible, and it's kind of sad to see the Oklahoma AG, what's his name again?
I can't remember myself.
Yeah, as a head of APA, because he is fully in the camp of fossil fuel industries, and there's going to be a lot of resistance to any sort of changes that might alleviate climate change as an issue in the short term. In the long term, there's still probably going to be things done, but.
Now, could you see that the Trump administration having any effect, even positive effect, on the fight against climate change, or do you have a negative importance for the future?
Yeah, over the next few years, we already have, again, the market forces at work with renewable energies. It's already going. The rest of the world is going to leave us behind in terms of solar, wind development. We have an opportunity to jump on that technological train to advance our own position in the world regarding these. Fossil fuel is a very good energy source right now. It's what we've depended on, but it is on its way out. While we still have more technologies to get extra oil and gas out of the ground through fracking, that too has its own limit. You might be adding an extra 10 or 20 years onto our supplies with that, but there is going to be a transition, and whether or not we're a part of that transition and making money off it eventually is the question that the Trump administration has to ask itself. Short-term solutions, they're going to get more money for the fossil fuel industry and probably prevent some of the changes that might happen normally, but they're on their way.
Well, excellent. So overall, do you see America being fossil-free in the future?
There's always going to be a place for fossil fuels, especially when it comes to plastics, other sorts of derivatives from the distillation of oils, and still, renewable energies like wind and solar. You're going to have some limitations due to the wind and when the sun's out as well. So there's going to be a transition. The question is going to be, how fast does the transition go? The government has a role to play in increasing that transition or hastening that transition through things like the carbon tax, which is a very unpopular idea in a lot of corners, but it would make that transition happen more quickly and more effectively, which, if your goal is to try and limit some of the negative effects that climate change could bring about, it seems to be a no-brainer, but we'll see.
Well, cool. Well, thanks for stopping in with us.
No problem. Thank you.
With that, I'd like to introduce our last segment, the open forum. On this segment, we have some of our usual characters, and we have one new. So, I'd like to introduce John Keenan, Jack Fechter, Niels Erlandson, and our new guest, Matthew Dickey. How are you guys all doing today?
Doing well.
Good.
Yeah.
Awesome. So we just had an expert opinion in from Mr. Erlandson, which is Niels' father, about climate change. So I'd like to start off the discussion by asking, do you all believe in climate change? Why don't we start with John?
Yes, the climate is changing.
I would also believe that the climate is changing, yes.
Yes, I believe in man-made climate change.
Yes, the evidence is irrefutable.
Now, assuming that we all agree somewhat on that, I'd like to launch into the second question, which is, should something be done about climate change? Niels, since your father proposed some very interesting solutions, why don't you start?
I think that, we're going to have to do something, or else it's going to come back to haunt all of us. Our burning of fossil fuels and our other environment-damaging activities is causing a serious problem. Sea levels are going to rise, some very unpredictable weather patterns are going to form, and we're all going to be the worse for it.
Then Matthew, since you're somewhat ideologically aligned with Niels, do you have anything to comment on that?
Yeah, I agree with most of what Niels was saying, and I definitely think that the Paris Agreement is definitely a step in the right direction in terms of the United States on an international level, but we'll have to see how it progresses to see if it actually is working.
Now, the Paris Agreement sets a goal for climate change. It calls for a certain % of emissions reductions before 2030. How do you see that being implemented?
So this is actually where I'd say my major issue with the Paris Agreement is the United Nations didn't want to scare any countries away from signing the agreement. So all it is a proposed goal, and there will be no sanctions or nothing to reprimand any countries that don't even attempt to meet those goals. So that's why right now all the countries that have accepted and ratified the treaty, they are proposing goals, but there's absolutely nothing holding them to those goals. It's more of a informal agreement or hope that they'll reach those goals.
Okay, cool. But do you have any policy ideas about how this could be implemented? Niels?
Well, I think that more than the Paris agreements, our current domestic policy on climate change is good. Whether that will survive the reign of Pruitt, who is the Oklahoma man you described earlier, no one can say.
So what is our current policy on climate change?
Well, there is a carbon tax. We basically tax businesses on their emissions.
Okay. Now, do either of you take issue with this policy?
No, I personally don't, but I do take issue with the Paris Agreement. And you said that there were no penalties, and the reason why that is because smaller countries that really can't handle the burden, like countries like Greenland, Mexico, mainly third world countries, they can't really, as their economies develop and growing, they can't they can't survive with all these regulations, whereas countries like the United States and the rest of Europe have had time to industrialize. Well, they're just getting to that step.
Maybe if we helped said countries, those of us who can definitely afford it, that would work. And most of the developing countries, well, we haven't entirely met those standards at home. We need to fix that first.
Yeah, I agree with what John was saying. However, the developing nations with the Kyoto Protocol, which I believe was 2009 or 2007, the developing nations were actually much stronger with meeting those goals proposed in the Kyoto Agreement than the developing nations. And we even saw Canada, which is one of the most industrialized nations in the world, actually leave the Kyoto Protocol. And developing nations were actually able to work harder at meeting their goals set through the Kyoto Protocol.
So you would you would advocate that, like, John's point of view is like not as relevant because the developing nations have proven that they are able to cut emissions?
Well, I definitely agree that it's sort of unfair to expect developing nations who haven't had a chance to develop with carbon emissions to do so without carbon emissions when we're sitting here completely developed after moving through using fossil fuels. However, we're seeing with developing nations right now, wherever we're helping provide infrastructure to set up non-carbon based emissions, it's actually benefiting those countries because they're skipping the carbon emission industrialization step and moving straight towards the renewable resources step, which is where developed nations are moving towards now.
Okay, that sounds like an excellent policy view. Do either of you like take issue with the idea of like skipping the carbon industrialization stage for developing countries?
Personally, I think that it would be like all the developed nations currently have had like a head start in the fact that they were able to go through like the industrial revolution with carbon emissions and get ourselves to the point where now we're starting to focus more on renewable energy. And if we did take that away from developed nations, it would put them at like an extreme disadvantage to the rest of the world. Personally, I'm very against like the continuation of like fossil fuel burning. I do believe that we should focus on creating technologies for renewable energy. But I do think that as in its current moment, it would be almost unfair for the developed countries to force that sort of energy upon the developing nations.
Well, in my opinion, we're past fairness. It's a problem that we've all created, and while they may not have had a significant part in the problem, we're all going to have a part in the solution.
So would you advocate for developed nations to like offer monetary aid? Would this be mandatory?
Definitely.
Okay. And how do you enforce that?
Well, I don't know very much about how such things are enforced, but I think it's a good idea to try and make sure that the developed countries that caused the problem are going to help the developing countries that now have to deal with it.
So you are in favor
Yes.
of offering monetary aid to developing
Yes.
countries? Okay. John, do you agree with Niels or?
No, I'm completely against it. I don't think that just the United States, which I'm assuming you're referring to, in that they should help other developing countries. We can't pay for it right now. I think that's a major concern. And also, back to how you talked about how developing nations are jumping ahead by just going straight into developing wind power and solar power. I would disagree with that because these nations, they also have to have a built-in fossil fuel industry to help provide power because of the simple fact that the wind doesn't blow all the time and the sun doesn't shine all the time. And right now, as we're speaking, there is no way to store power that is received from air, wind, in a widespread use. So they have to use it as it's coming in. So there also has to be an infrastructure to do it for when when it can't be used.
Well, I did not mean to target the U.S. alone. We are hardly the only developed nation in the world. I'm sure the burden could be shared by all of the wealthier countries. And about solar power not being able to be stored, that is a problem. It needs to be fixed. But the solution to that is not to halt all development in renewable energy sources. It's to create that infrastructure.
I think personally, like right now, I don't know if like solar power or like almost any other sort of renewable energy is like at the point where it like even could be implemented, because like making solar panels is like terrible for the environment. Like physically making car batteries for electric cars is like also awful for the environment. So I do think that there needs to be more like science that needs to be put in before we could like fully implement it into the developing countries.
So I think the trade-off there is it's bad for the environment, but the carbon that we're pumping into the atmosphere through carbon-based products such as fossil fuels, you guys all agreed in believing in climate change, is it's increasing the temperature of the planet, which is destroying the various ecosystems around the globe, and it sort of becomes a trade-off. What's worse for the environment, like building solar panel to get away from carbon-based emissions, or keeping carbon and increasing the Earth's temperature and hurting many of the ecosystems in the biosphere?
Okay, so essentially, you guys believe that for now we should use fossil fuels, right?
Yeah, I would say that as we're speaking today, I just think there's not much of an infrastructure to support widespread renewable energy.
And you guys believe that this infrastructure is also not the responsibility of developed countries to develop in developing countries?
I would say no, simply on the fact that we did it ourselves, they can do it themselves.
Okay. And you guys believe that that this sort of infrastructure in developing countries has to be paid for by the Western countries, right?
Yeah. I think we've already made the problem, and postponing our solution because it's not quite ready isn't going to make that go away. We have to address it, and we have to address it soon.
I wouldn't necessarily say we should force the developed nations to foot the bill on this, but maybe encouraging, so for instance, using the United States, we contract a lot of our work through different companies, and so if we contract a company that is working with building solar panels, if we recommend to the developing nations, say, hey, contract this company, they can help you guys out, sort of in that aspect, like pushing developing nations towards these goals and not necessarily paying for it for themselves, for us paying for them to do so.
Okay. Well, I think that wraps up the amount of time we've had. I think we've got some very interesting point of views from the right and from the left. For those of you at home, thank you for tuning in. This has been 143 TV. I'm Andy Tierney, and see you next time.